The morning started like any other in the small desert town of Cedar Ridge, Arizona. 15-year-old Lily Rodriguez was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a piece of stale bread with the last bit of peanut butter they had in the house. The sun was barely coming up, casting long shadows through the cracked window of their old farmhouse. Her mother, Carmen, was pacing back and forth in the living room. She had been doing this a lot lately, walking around the house like a caged animal, muttering to herself and running her hands through her unwashed hair. Ever since Dad died in that terrible accident at the copper mine 3 years ago, Mom hadn't been the same person. At first, Carmen tried to keep things together. She got a job at Betty's Diner in town, working double shifts to pay the bills. But the grief was eating her alive from the inside. Some nights Lily would find her mother crying over old photo albums, holding Dad's work shirts and talking to them like he was still there. Then came the drinking. It started small, just a beer after work to help her relax. But soon it became a bottle of cheap whiskey every night, sometimes two. Carmen would pass out on the couch, leaving Lily to take care of everything. The teenager learned to cook, clean, and even tried to fix things around the house when they broke. Their small ranch, which had been Dad's pride and joy, was falling apart. The fence posts were rotting, the barn roof had holes in it, and weeds grew everywhere. The few cattle they had left were thin and sickly. Nobody had money to feed them properly or call a veterinarian when they got sick. The bills kept piling up on the kitchen counter like autumn leaves. Electric company, water company, property taxes, medical bills from Dad's accident that insurance didn't cover, they all demanded money that simply wasn't there. Lily had gotten pretty good at reading these official letters, even though the words sometimes scared her. Last week, Carmen lost her job at the diner. Mr. Peterson, the owner, was a kind man who had given her many chances. But when she showed up drunk for the third time and dropped a whole tray of food on a customer, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He pulled her aside and said he was sorry, but he had to let her go. That night, Carmen came home and just sat in Dad's old recliner staring at the wall. She didn't eat dinner. She didn't even drink, which was unusual. She just sat there in complete silence until Lily went to bed, wondering what was going through her mother's mind. The next few days were strange. Carmen seemed different. Not better, just different. She wasn't crying or drinking as much. Instead, she was quiet and distant, like she had made some kind of decision, but wasn't ready to share it yet. She spent hours looking through old papers and documents, occasionally making phone calls in hushed tones. Lily tried asking what was wrong, but Carmen would just pat her head and say everything would be okay. But 15-year-old girls aren't stupid, and Lily could sense that something big was about to happen. The air in the house felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm. On Tuesday morning, Lily woke up to find her mother loading things into their old pickup truck. Not many things, just a small suitcase and a cardboard box. Carmen was moving quickly, like she was afraid she might change her mind if she took too long. "Mom, what are you doing?" Lily asked, still in her pajamas and rubbing sleep from her, as Carmen couldn't look at her directly. "I'm going to visit your Aunt Rosa in California for a while. I need to get myself together, baby girl. This place, it has too many memories of your father." "Can I come with you?" Lily asked, though something in her mother's voice told her the answer before she even asked. "Not right now, sweetheart. You need to stay here and take care of the house. I'll be back soon, I promise. There's some food in the pantry, and Mrs. Johnson next door said she'd check on you." But Lily knew Mrs. Johnson had moved away 2 months ago. The nearest neighbor was now old Mr. Garcia, and he lived 5 miles down the road. Her stomach started to feel sick as the truth began to sink in. Carmen finally looked at her daughter, and Lily could see tears in her eyes. But there was something else there too, a kind of desperate determination that scared her. "You're stronger than I ever was, Lily. Your father always said that. You have his spirit, his courage. You'll figure out what to do." Those words would haunt Lily for weeks to come. Carmen kissed her forehead quickly, like she was afraid she might start crying again. Then she grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door. Lily followed her outside, still not fully believing this was really happening. The morning air was cold and she shivered in her thin pajamas. Carmen threw her suitcase in the back of the pickup truck and climbed into the driver's seat. "Mom, wait!" Lily ran to the truck. "When are you coming back? How will you call me? We don't even have a phone anymore." Carmen rolled down the window and handed her a folded piece of paper. "Everything you need to know is in there. I love you, baby girl, more than you'll ever understand." The engine started with its usual coughing and sputtering. Black smoke came out of the exhaust pipe as Carmen put the truck in reverse. Lily stood there in the driveway holding the piece of paper, watching the only family she had left drive away from her. She watched until the truck disappeared around the bend in the dirt road, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust that slowly settled in the still morning air. Even then, she kept standing there hoping to see the headlights coming back around the corner. But they never did. Finally, with shaking hands, Lily unfolded the paper her mother had given her. The writing was messy, like Carmen had been crying while she wrote it. "My dear Lily, I'm sorry I'm not strong enough to be the mother you deserve. The house is paid for 3 more months. There are some canned goods in the pantry, and a little money in the coffee can above the refrigerator. You're the smartest, bravest girl I know. Find your own way, sweetheart. Sometimes parents fail, but that doesn't mean you have to. I love you always. Mom." At the bottom, there was $43 in crumpled bills. Lily read the note 3 times before the words really sank in. Her mother wasn't coming back, at least not anytime soon. She was 15 years old, had no phone, no car, and the nearest town was 15 miles away down a dusty road that barely anyone traveled. She walked back into the house and sat on the couch, still holding the money and the note. The silence was deafening. She had gotten used to the sounds of her mother moving around. Even when Carmen was drunk or crying, there was always some sign of life in the house. Now there was nothing. The reality of her situation began to hit her in waves. She was completely alone. No family, no friends nearby, no way to contact anyone even if she wanted to. The $43 might buy food for a week, maybe 2 if she was very careful. After that, she had no idea what she would do. For the first time since her father died, Lily cried. Not the quiet tears she had shed when Mom was drinking, but deep, painful sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. She cried for her father, who had been taken away too soon. She cried for her mother, who was so broken by grief that she couldn't see any other way out. And she cried for herself, a 15-year-old girl who now had to figure out how to survive on her own. But even as she cried, a small voice in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like her father, reminded her that feeling sorry for herself wouldn't solve anything. Dad had always taught her that life was tough, but tough people found ways to keep going. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, Lily wiped her tears and started to think about what she needed to do. She walked to the kitchen and opened every cabinet and drawer, taking inventory of what food they had left. 3 cans of beans, 2 cans of corn, a box of crackers that was half empty, some rice in a jar, and a few other odds and ends. Maybe enough for a week if she was very careful. The water was still running, which was good. The electricity was still on too, though she wasn't sure for how long. She found the pile of bills on the counter and tried to make sense of them, but most of the words were too complicated for her to understand completely. That night, Lily lay in her bed listening to every sound the old house made. The wind rattling the windows, the floors creaking as the wood cooled down from the day's heat, mice scurrying somewhere in the walls. Sounds that had never bothered her before now seemed scary and loud. She pulled her father's old jacket over her blanket. It still smelled faintly like him, motor oil and aftershave and the desert air he loved so much. Somehow having it close made her feel a little less alone. As she drifted off to sleep, Lily made herself a promise. She would survive this. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way. Her parents might have given up, but she wouldn't. She was stronger than that. She had to be. The first week after her mother left was the hardest week of Lily's life. She tried to ration the food carefully, eating only 1 small meal a day and drinking lots of water to help fill her empty stomach. The $43 her mother had left felt like a fortune and nothing at all, depending on how she looked at it. Every morning she would wake up hoping to hear the sound of the old pickup truck coming back up the driveway. She would lie in bed for a few minutes listening carefully, but all she ever heard was the wind and the occasional call of a desert bird. On the third day, Lily decided to walk to the main road to see if she could catch a ride into town. She put on her best clothes and walked the 1.5 miles to where their dirt road met the paved highway. Then she stood there for hours, watching for cars or trucks that might stop for her. 3 vehicles passed during the entire afternoon. The first was a fancy car with tinted windows that didn't even slow down. The second was a beat-up truck driven by a man who looked at her suspiciously and drove away quickly when she waved. The third was a sheriff's deputy who stopped and asked her what she was doing. Lily's heart almost stopped. She knew if she told the truth, they would take her away from the house and put her in foster care or some kind of home for kids. She had heard stories about those places from other kids at school, and none of them were good. "Just walking, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Getting some fresh air." The deputy looked at her for a long moment. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes, but Lily could see he was suspicious. "You live around here?" "I don't." "Recognize you, yes, sir. Down that road." She pointed toward their dirt road. "My mom sent me to check the mailbox." It wasn't completely a lie. There was a mailbox at the end of their road, though they never got much mail anymore. The deputy seemed to accept her explanation and drove away, but not before warning her to be careful walking alone on the highway. That night, Lily realized she couldn't risk going back to the main road. If the deputy saw her again, he might start asking more questions. She was truly on her own. By the end of the first week, she had eaten the last can of beans and most of the crackers. Her stomach hurt constantly now, not just from hunger, but from anxiety about what would happen when the food ran out completely. She had never been so scared in her life. That's when she remembered something her father used to tell her about the desert. "The land will provide if you know how to ask it," he would say when they went on their long walks together. He had grown up poor and had learned to find food in places where most people saw only empty wasteland. Lily spent the next morning searching through her father's things, looking for the old notebook where he had written down information about desert plants and survival techniques. She found it in a cardboard box under his bed, along with his old hunting knife and a pair of binoculars. The notebook was filled with her father's careful handwriting and simple drawings of different plants. Prickly pear cactus. The pads could be eaten after removing the spines, and the fruit was sweet and nutritious. Mesquite trees. The beans could be ground into flour. Desert sage. Good for tea and settling upset stomachs. Barrel cactus could provide water in emergencies. Reading her father's notes made her cry again, but this time the tears were mixed with hope. He had left her something valuable after all, the knowledge she needed to survive. The next morning, Lily packed a small bag with a kitchen knife, a pot, and the last of their drinking water. She put on her father's old work gloves and went out to learn how to live off the land. Finding the plants was harder than she had expected. The desert looked different when you were searching for specific things instead of just enjoying a walk. But after several hours of careful searching, she found a large prickly pear cactus growing near their old water well. Removing the spines was tricky and painful work, even with the gloves. She got stuck several times and her hands were sore and bleeding by the time she managed to cut away a few small pieces of the cactus pad. But when she cooked them over a small fire in their backyard, they actually tasted pretty good. Kind of like green beans with a slightly slimy texture. It wasn't much food, but it was something. And more importantly, it was proof that she could take care of herself if she had to. Over the next few days, Lily became bolder in her foraging expeditions. She found mesquite trees near the dry creek bed behind their house and learned to identify the long, sweet pods that could be chewed for nutrition. She discovered a patch of purslane, a succulent plant her father had called desert spinach, growing in the shade of some rocks. The food she found in the desert wasn't enough to fill her up, but it kept her from starving. She was losing weight quickly and her clothes were starting to hang loose on her small frame, but she was surviving, and that felt like a victory. The hardest part wasn't the hunger, it was the loneliness. Lily had never realized how much she depended on human conversation until she didn't have it anymore. She started talking to herself just to hear a voice in the empty house. She had long conversations with her father's picture, telling him about her day and asking him for advice. Sometimes she would catch herself talking to the chickens that still wandered around their property. There were only 3 left. The rest had been eaten by coyotes or had wandered off looking for food. But these 3 stubborn hens remained, somehow finding enough bugs and seeds to keep themselves alive. "At least you girls know how to take care of yourselves," Lily would say to them as she scattered some of her precious rice for them to eat. She knew she should probably eat the rice herself, but watching the chickens peck and cluck made her feel less alone. At night, the desert came alive with sounds that had never bothered her when her parents were around. Coyotes howling in the distance, owls calling from the old barn, mice scratching in the walls. Every sound made her jump and wonder if something dangerous was getting closer to the house. She learned to sleep with her father's hunting knife under her pillow and a baseball bat next to her bed. Not that she really knew how to use either weapon, but having them close made her feel a little safer. During her 3rd week alone, Lily made a discovery that changed everything. While exploring further from the house than she had ever gone before, she found the ruins of an old mining camp about 2 miles away. Most of the buildings had collapsed years ago, but there were still some cans of food scattered around the area. Beans, peaches, even some canned meat that was still good. It wasn't much, but it was more food than she had seen in weeks. She carefully loaded everything into her backpack and hiked back home, feeling like she had struck gold. That night she ate her first full meal since her mother left, a can of peaches that tasted like the most delicious thing she had ever put in her mouth. She even opened a can of beans and ate half of it, saving the rest for the next day. But even with her new food supplies, Lily knew her situation was getting desperate. She was down to about 90 pounds, and she could see her ribs clearly when she looked in the mirror. Her hair was falling out in small clumps, and she was tired all the time. Worse, the weather was starting to change. It was late fall now, and the desert nights were getting cold. Soon it would be winter, and she had no way to heat the house. The electricity had been shut off the week before, and she was down to cooking over small fires in the backyard. One particularly cold morning, Lily woke up to find frost on the inside of her bedroom windows. She had piled every blanket in the house on her bed, but she was still shivering. Her lips were turning blue and her fingers were so stiff she could barely move them. That's when she realized that hunger wasn't going to kill her. The cold would get her first. She spent that day gathering as much firewood as she could find, breaking up old fence posts and pieces of furniture to burn in the fireplace. The house filled with smoke because the chimney was partially blocked, but at least she was warm. As she sat by the fire that night, eating a few mesquite beans and watching the flames dance, Lily made a decision. She couldn't stay at the house much longer. Winter was coming, and she didn't have enough food or fuel to survive it. She needed help, even if it meant risking being taken away by social services. But where could she go? She didn't know anyone in the nearest town, and she had no money for bus fare even if she could get there. Her mother's family lived hundreds of miles away in Texas, and she didn't even have their addresses or phone numbers. For the first time since her mother left, Lily felt completely hopeless. She had done everything she could think of to survive, but it wasn't enough. The desert that her father had loved so much was slowly killing her, one cold, hungry day at a time. That night, she dreamed about her parents. They were standing together in a place filled with warm light, beckoning for her to join them. In the dream, she felt safe and loved and well-fed for the first time in weeks. When she woke up, Lily realized she had been thinking about giving up. The dream had felt so real, so peaceful compared to the constant struggle of her daily life. It would be so easy to just stop fighting, to let the cold and hunger take her away from all this pain. But then she remembered her father's voice. Tough people find ways to keep going. She wasn't ready to give up yet. Tomorrow, she would venture further from the house than she had ever gone before. Maybe she would find more supplies, or maybe she would find Pitt was a Tuesday morning when everything changed for Lily. She had been surviving on her own for almost a month now, and her body was starting to give up the fight. She weighed barely 85 pounds, and simple tasks like walking to the well for water left her exhausted and dizzy. That morning, she had decided to search for food in an area she had never explored before, a rocky canyon about 3 miles from her house. Her father had mentioned it once as a place where Apache people used to gather medicinal plants, but he had never taken her there. Lily packed her small backpack with a water bottle, her father's hunting knife, and the notebook with his plant drawings. She was so weak that she had to stop and rest every few hundred yards, but she kept pushing forward. Something inside her, maybe desperation, maybe hope, told her she might find something important in that canyon. The walk took her most of the morning. By the time she reached the canyon entrance, the sun was high and hot, even though it was November. She was sweating and breathing hard, which wasn't good because she couldn't afford to lose any more water from her already dehydrated body. The canyon was beautiful in a harsh, wild way. Red sandstone walls rose up on both sides, creating cool shadows and interesting patterns of light. Ancient petroglyphs were carved into some of the rock faces, pictures of animals and people and symbols that she couldn't understand but found fascinating. Lily spent an hour searching for edible plants, but found very little. A few small cactus fruits that the birds hadn't eaten yet, some seeds from a mesquite tree, nothing substantial. Her stomach was cramping with hunger, and her head felt light and disconnected from her body. She decided to rest in the shade of a large boulder before starting the long walk home. That's when she made a mistake that almost cost her everything. While climbing over some rocks to reach a shady spot, Lily's weakened legs gave out beneath her. She slipped and fell hard, hitting her head on a sharp stone. Pain exploded behind her eyes, and she felt warm blood running down her forehead. For a moment, she just lay there, too stunned and hurt to move. When she tried to sit up, the world spun around her like a carnival ride. She was dizzy, bleeding, and so tired that she could barely keep her eyes open. That's when she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. At first, Lily thought she was hallucinating. She had been alone for so long that sometimes her mind played tricks on her, making her think she heard voices or saw people who weren't really there. But these footsteps sounded real, soft but purposeful, like someone who knew how to move quietly through the desert. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then continued. In her direction, Lily's heart began racing. What if it was someone dangerous? She was too weak to run or defend herself. Then a shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see the most unexpected person imaginable. An elderly Native American man was standing over her, his weathered face creased with concern. He appeared to be in his 70s, with long gray hair braided down his back and wearing simple clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and sturdy hiking boots. His dark eyes were kind but sharp, taking in her condition with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen many emergencies in his lifetime. "Easy there, little sister," he said in accented English, his voice gentle but commanding. "You've hurt yourself." Lily tried to speak, but all that came out was a small whimper. The man knelt beside her and carefully examined the cut on her forehead. His hands were surprisingly gentle for someone his age, and he moved with the confidence of someone who knew about treating injuries. "This needs cleaning," he said, more to himself than to her. He pulled a clean bandana from his pocket and a small water bottle from his backpack. "This might sting a little." As he cleaned her wound, the man studied her face with growing concern. Lily knew how she must look. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, lips cracked from dehydration, skin stretched tight over bones that showed too clearly. "When did you last eat, child?" he asked quietly. "Yesterday morning," Lily whispered, though it had actually been 2 days ago. She was embarrassed to admit how desperate her situation had become. The man's expression grew even more worried. He helped her sit up slowly, supporting her with a strong arm. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Rodriguez," she managed to say. I live about 3 miles that way." She pointed vaguely in the direction of her house. "I know that area," the man said. "Old mining country. What are you doing out here alone? Where are your parents?" That simple question broke something loose inside Lily. Maybe it was her physical weakness, maybe it was the relief of finally talking to another human being. But suddenly she was crying and telling this stranger everything. About her father's death, her mother's drinking, the abandonment, the weeks of trying to survive on her own. The man listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with every detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had told him. "My name is Joseph Crowfeather," he finally said. "And you're not going back to that house alone." "But I have to," Lily protested weakly. "It's all I have left. My dad built that house. I can't just leave." Joseph shook his head firmly. "That house won't do you any good if you die in it. And that's what's going to happen if you keep trying to live there by yourself. Look at you, child. You're nothing but skin and bones." He was right, and Lily knew it. She was dying slowly, day by day. But the thought of leaving her family's home, the last connection she had to her parents, made her chest tight with panic. "Don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. "If the authorities find me, they'll put me in some kind of institution. I've heard stories about those places. I'd rather take my chances on my own." Joseph studied her face for a moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I live on the San Carlos Apache Reservation, about 10 miles from here. I have a daughter who's a nurse. She can take proper care of that head wound and get some food into you. You can stay with us until we figure out what to do next." Lily's first instinct was to refuse. She had been taught to be wary of strangers, especially men she didn't know. But something about Joseph felt different. Maybe it was his gentle manner with her injury. Maybe it was the genuine concern in his eyes. But she sensed that he was someone she could trust. Still, she hesitated. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Joseph was quiet for a moment, looking out across the desert landscape. 40 years ago, I was a young man working construction in Phoenix. I was walking home from work one night when I heard crying. Coming from an alley, I found a little white boy, maybe 6 years old, beaten up and scared. His father had been drinking and threw him out of the house. He paused, lost in the memory. I could have kept walking. It wasn't my problem, and I had my own troubles to worry about. But my grandmother always taught me that when the Creator puts someone in your path who needs help, you don't ask questions. You just help. "What happened to the boy?" Lily asked. "I took him home, fed him, let him stay the night. In the morning, I walked him to the police station and made sure he got placed with a good family. Never saw him again after that." Joseph looked at her seriously. "But I learned something important that day. Sometimes the spirits put us in the right place at the right time for a reason. Today I was supposed to find you." Lily felt tears running down her cheeks again. After weeks of being completely alone, having someone care about what happened to her felt overwhelming. Joseph helped her to her feet slowly, supporting most of her weight. "My truck is parked about a mile from here. Can you walk that far if we take it slow?" Lily nodded, though she wasn't sure she could make it that distance. But with Joseph's strong arm supporting her and frequent rest stops, they eventually reached an old Ford pickup truck parked beside a dirt road she hadn't known existed. The drive to the reservation took about 20 minutes, passing through landscape that was similar to what Lily was used to, but somehow different. The houses they passed were small and simple, many with vegetable gardens and solar panels on the roofs. Children played in dusty yards while adults worked on cars or tended to animals. Joseph's house was modest but well-maintained, a single-story, adobe home with a small front porch and a satellite dish. As they pulled into the driveway, a woman in her 40s came out to meet them. She had Joseph's kind eyes and warm smile, but when she saw Lily, her expression immediately shifted to professional concern. "Dad, what happened?" she asked, rushing to help Lily out of the truck. "This is Lily Rodriguez," Joseph said. "She's been living alone for over a month. She needs medical attention and a good meal." The woman, who introduced herself as Maria Crowfeather, was indeed a nurse, as Joseph had said. She worked at the Indian Health Service clinic on the reservation and had seen many cases of malnutrition and neglect over the years. But Lily's condition shocked even her. Within minutes, Maria had Lily sitting at her kitchen table, examining her injuries and taking her vital signs. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. She was severely dehydrated, and she had lost nearly 30 pounds from her already small frame. "We need to get fluids into you right away," Maria said, starting an IV with the F. 3 weeks after Joseph found her in the canyon, Lily was beginning to look like a healthy teenager again. Maria's careful medical care and the steady meals had helped her gain back 15 pounds, and the color had returned to her cheeks. More importantly, the haunted look in her eyes was starting to fade. Living with the Crowfeather family was unlike anything Lily had ever experienced. Their home was filled with warmth and conversation, but also with a deep respect for tradition and family that she had only heard about in stories. Joseph's wife, Elena, had passed away 5 years earlier, but her presence was still felt everywhere. In the family photos on the walls, the traditional pottery she had made, and the way Joseph and Maria still spoke about her in present tense, as if she might walk through the door at any moment. The tribal council had agreed to let Lily stay temporarily while they worked out the legal issues. It helped that Joseph was a respected elder who had served on the council himself for many years, but everyone understood that this arrangement couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, the state authorities would want to know what had happened to a missing teenager, especially once she started attending school again. Lily tried not to think about that too much. Instead, she focused on recovering her strength and learning about life on the reservation. It was a different world from the isolated ranch where she had grown up, but in many ways, it felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. One morning, while Joseph was teaching her how to identify different types of medicinal plants in his garden, Maria came home from work looking unusually tired and frustrated. "Bad day at the clinic?" Joseph asked, noticing his daughter's expression. Maria sat down heavily at the kitchen table and rubbed her temples. "We're so short-staffed, Dad. Dr. Patterson is out with the flu, and our other nurse called in sick. I had 43 patients to see today by myself. Some of them waited 4 hours just to get their blood pressure checked." Lily looked up from the plant guide she was studying. "Is it always like that?" "More and more often," Maria said sadly. "The Indian Health Service is supposed to provide medical care for everyone on the reservation, but they never give us enough funding or staff. We have people with diabetes who can't get their medication regularly, elderly folks who can't make it to the clinic because they don't have transportation, kids who need vaccinations but whose parents work 2 jobs and can't take time off to bring them in." "What about the hospital in town?" Lily asked. Joseph made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a snort. "That hospital charges $200 just to walk through the door. Most people here don't have that kind of money or insurance that covers it." That conversation stuck with Lily for days. She had never really thought about healthcare before. When she was sick as a child, her parents had taken her to the doctor, and somehow the bills got paid. But now she was seeing what happened to people who didn't have those options. A few days later, Maria asked if Lily wanted to come to the clinic with her. "I could use some help with filing and organizing supplies," she said. "It's not much, but you'd be doing something useful." Lily eagerly agreed. She was getting restless staying at home all day, and she wanted to find some way to repay the Crowfeather family for their kindness. The Indian Health Service Clinic was a small, 1-story building that served the entire San Carlos Reservation, over 10,000 people spread across nearly 2 million acres of desert and mountains. Inside, it was clean but clearly understaffed and underfunded. The waiting room was always crowded, medical equipment was old and frequently broken, and Maria seemed to be running from one emergency to another all day long. Lily started by organizing supply closets and filing patient charts. But she quickly realized there were bigger problems she could help solve. Many of the elderly patients spoke only Apache and struggled to communicate with the younger staff members who were more comfortable in English. Lily had been picking up basic Apache phrases from Joseph, and she found she had a natural talent for languages. More importantly, she discovered she had a gift for making people feel comfortable and cared for. Maybe it was because she had experienced her own medical crisis, or maybe it was just her naturally compassionate personality, but patients seemed to respond well to her presence. "You have healing hands," said Mrs. Running Bear, an 80-year-old woman with diabetes who came in twice a week for checkups. "Not like a doctor's hands, like a granddaughter's hands." Within a month, Lily had become an unofficial assistant at the clinic. She couldn't do medical procedures, of course, but she helped with translation, comforted frightened children while they got shots, and made sure elderly patients understood their medication instructions. Maria noticed the difference immediately. "The whole atmosphere in the clinic has changed since you started helping," she told Lily one evening. "People are calmer. They're more willing to wait when we're running behind, and they actually seem to enjoy coming in for their appointments." But Lily was also noticing problems that went beyond what could be fixed by better customer service. The reservation was large and rural, with many families living miles from the clinic. Getting to medical appointments meant taking time off work, finding transportation, and sometimes paying for gas that people couldn't really afford. "What about the people who can't make it to the clinic?" Lily asked Maria. "I've been reading the patient files, and there are dozens of people with chronic conditions who miss appointments all the time. They're not getting the care they need." Maria sighed. "I know. We've talked about setting up satellite clinics or doing home visits, but we just don't have the staff or resources. I can barely keep up with the patients who do make it in." That night, Lily lay awake thinking about the problem. There had to be a solution that didn't require hiring more doctors or building new facilities, both of which were probably impossible given the government funding situation. The next morning, she approached Joseph with an idea that had been forming in her mind. "What if we brought the clinic to the patients instead of making them come to us?" she said. "Like a mobile medical unit that could visit the most remote areas on a regular schedule." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "That's not a bad idea in theory. But how would you make it work? You need medical equipment, supplies, a way to transport everything." Lily had been thinking about that too. "What if we started small? Just basic services. Blood pressure checks, diabetes monitoring, wound care, health education. We could use one of those big RVs as a mobile clinic. Maria could see patients inside while I help with registration and basic procedures." "RVs cost money," Joseph pointed out. "More money than the clinic has. But churches and community organizations sometimes donate vehicles for good causes," Lily said. "And there are grants available for rural health programs. I've been researching it online at the library." Maria overheard their conversation and joined them at the kitchen table. "You know, that's actually not a crazy idea. There are other reservations that have tried mobile clinics with some success. The biggest challenge is getting the funding and regulatory approval." Over the next few weeks, Lily threw herself into researching mobile health programs. She spent hours at the tribal library, learning about grant applications, reading about successful programs on other reservations, and figuring out what kind of equipment and supplies would be needed. She also started mapping the reservation, identifying the most underserved areas and figuring out optimal routes and schedules. Her father had taught her to read maps and plan efficient routes during their hunting trips, skills that turned out to be surprisingly useful for healthcare logistics. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" Maria said one evening, finding Lily surrounded by papers and charts spread all over the living room floor. "People are suffering because they can't get basic medical care," Lily said simply. "If there's a way to fix that, shouldn't we try?" Maria sat down beside her and looked at the carefully planned routes and supply lists. "You know this would be a huge undertaking, right? We're talking about months of preparation, thousands of dollars in funding, getting approval from the Tribal Council and the Indian Health Service." "I know," Lily said, "but Mrs. Running Bear told me yesterday that her grandson hasn't had his diabetes checked in 6 months because her daughter can't get time off work to drive him to the clinic. He's 12 years old and his blood sugar could be dangerously high right now. How can we not try to help him?" That weekend, Joseph took Lily to visit some of the most remote areas of the reservation, places where families lived 20 or 30 miles from the nearest paved road. They met elderly people who hadn't seen a doctor in years, diabetic patients who were rationing their insulin because they couldn't afford to refill their prescriptions, and mothers who were worried sick about their children but had no way to get them medical attention. "This girl wants to bring a mobile clinic out here once a month," Joseph told the families they visited, introducing Lily and her idea. "What do you think? Would that help?" The response was overwhelming. Person after person told them about family members who were sick, medical conditions that weren't being treated, and the impossible choice between taking time off work for a doctor's appointment or paying rent that month. "If you could make this happen," said Tom Eaglefeather, a 60-year-old man with 2 years after Joseph found her dying in the canyon. Lily stood in front of a gleaming white RV that had been converted into a state-of-the-art mobile medical clinic. The words San Carlos Mobile Health Unit were painted on the side in both English and Apache, along with a traditional design that Elena Crow Feather had created before her death. The transformation had taken 18 months of hard work, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. What had started as Lily's desperate idea to help a few underserved families had become a model program that was being studied by other reservations across the country. The mobile clinic visited 15 different locations on a rotating schedule, bringing basic medical care directly to families who had gone years without seeing a doctor. They provided blood pressure screening, diabetes management, childhood vaccinations, prenatal care, and health education to over 800 people per month. But perhaps more importantly, the program had changed the way the entire reservation thought about healthcare. Instead of seeing medical care as something you had to travel long distances to receive, people now understood that health and wellness were community responsibilities that everyone could participate in. "Ready for another day of saving the world?" Maria asked, climbing into the driver's seat of the mobile unit. She had taken a leave of absence from the main clinic to focus entirely on the mobile program, a decision that had been difficult financially, but rewarding in every other way. Lily laughed as she loaded the last of their supplies into the RV. "I think we'll settle for helping Mrs. Whitecloud manage her diabetes and making sure little Tommy Eagle gets his vaccinations on schedule." Their first stop was a remote area called Cedar Springs, where 12 families lived scattered across several square miles of desert and mountain terrain. Before the mobile clinic started coming, the nearest medical care had been a 45-minute drive on unpaved roads that became impassable during the rainy season. As they pulled up to their designated meeting spot, a flat area next to the community center, people were already waiting for them. Elderly grandparents sat in folding chairs in the shade. Mothers held babies who needed checkups, and teenagers who had been recruited as volunteers helped set up tables and chairs. "Morning, Lily," called out Bobby Running Bear, Mrs. Running Bear's 16-year-old grandson whose diabetes had been Lily's original motivation for starting the mobile clinic program. "My blood sugar numbers have been really good this month. Want to see my logbook?" Lily grinned and gave him a high five. Bobby had gone from a scared kid who was skipping medical appointments to a confident young man who was thinking about becoming a nurse himself someday. His transformation was just one of dozens of success stories that made all the long hours and bureaucratic headaches worthwhile. Over the next 4 hours, Maria and Lily saw 37 patients. They checked blood pressure, monitored chronic conditions, provided medications, and gave several childhood immunizations. But just as importantly, they listened to people's concerns, provided health education, and connected families with social services they hadn't known were available. "You know what I love about this job?" Maria said as they drove to their next location. "We're not just treating diseases. We're building relationships with people and helping them take control of their own health." Lily nodded, updating patient files on her laptop. At 19, she had completed her GED and was halfway through an online nursing program, with plans to eventually become a nurse practitioner specializing in rural health. The state of Arizona had granted her special permission to work as a certified medical assistant while she completed her education. "I got a call from the Navajo Nation yesterday," Maria continued. "They want to send a delegation to observe our program and see if they can adapt it for their reservation. And there's a professor from the University of Arizona who wants to write a case study about our success." The recognition was gratifying, but what really mattered to Lily were the individual lives being changed. Like Margaret Thunderheart, a 60-year-old grandmother with high blood pressure who had been afraid to see doctors after a bad experience at the off-reservation hospital years earlier. The mobile clinic had given her a safe, culturally sensitive environment to address her health concerns, and her blood pressure was now well controlled. Or James Silversmith, a diabetic truck driver who had been missing work for medical appointments until the mobile clinic started coming to his neighborhood. Now he could get his monthly checkups without losing a day's pay, and his diabetes management had improved dramatically. Their second stop of the day was at White River Elementary School, where they provided health screenings for children and health education for parents. This was one of Lily's favorite parts of the job. Working with kids reminded her of her own difficult childhood and motivated her to make sure these children had better opportunities. "Miss Lily, look," said 7-year-old Amanda Begay, showing off her newly updated vaccination record. "My mom says I'm all caught up now and I won't get sick." "That's right," Lily said, kneeling down to Amanda's eye level. "And remember what we talked about. What are the most important things you can do to stay healthy?" "Wash my hands, eat vegetables, and get lots of sleep," Amanda recited proudly. These moments of connection with individual patients made all the challenges worthwhile. There had been plenty of obstacles over the past 2 years: funding crises, equipment breakdowns, bureaucratic battles with state and federal agencies, and the constant struggle to provide quality care with limited resources. The most difficult challenge had come 6 months earlier, when the Indian Health Service had threatened to shut down the mobile clinic program due to concerns about regulatory compliance. Lily had spent weeks writing reports, attending meetings, and advocating for the program's continuation. The support from community members had been overwhelming. Over 300 people signed a petition explaining how the mobile clinic had improved their lives and health outcomes. "This girl saved my grandson's life," Mrs. Running Bear had told the IHS Review Committee. Before the mobile clinic started coming, he was missing school all the time because his diabetes wasn't controlled. Now he's on the honor roll and talking about becoming a doctor himself. How can you put a price on that? The program had not only survived the review but had received additional funding for expansion. They were now planning to add a second mobile unit and hire additional staff, including a mental health counselor and a nutritionist. As they drove between appointments, Lily reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrible day when her mother abandoned her. She had gone from a starving, desperate teenager with no future to a young woman with purpose, education, and a career helping others. But perhaps more importantly, she had found a family and community that truly cared about her. Joseph had officially adopted her when she turned 18, making her legal status on the reservation secure. Maria had become like an older sister, teaching her professional skills and supporting her educational goals. And the entire community had embraced her as one of their own, despite her non-native background. "I got some interesting news today," Maria said as they pulled up to their final stop of the day. "Remember that article about our program that was published in the Journal of Rural Health? Well, it caught the attention of the Centers for Disease Control. They want to include our mobile clinic model in a national best practices guide for rural healthcare." Lily felt a surge of pride, not just for herself, but for the entire community that had made the program possible. "Dad is going to be so excited when he hears about that." She still called Joseph Dad now, and it felt completely natural. He had given her more than just a home. He had given her confidence, purpose, and the understanding that helping others was the best way to honor the help she had received. Their last appointment of the day was with Tom Eaglefeather, the man with high blood pressure, who had been one of Lily's first supporters when she was developing the mobile clinic proposal. His condition was now well controlled with medication and lifestyle changes, and he had become one of the program's most enthusiastic advocates. "How are you feeling, Mr. Eaglefeather?" Lily asked as she took his blood pressure reading. "Like a new man," he said with a grin. "My pressure is 128/82 today. 2 years ago it was so high I thought I was going to have a heart attack any day. Now I feel like I could climb those mountains over there." "Just remember to keep taking your medication and watch your salt intake," Maria reminded him. "And we'll see you again next month." As they finished packing up their equipment for the day, Tom pulled Lily aside. "I want you to know something, young lady. When you first came to our community, some people weren't sure about you. A white girl wanting to help Indians? Some folks thought maybe you had some kind of agenda or that you wouldn't stick around long enough to make a real difference." Lily nodded. She had sensed some initial skepticism from community members, which was completely understandable given the history of broken promises from outside organizations. But you proved everybody wrong. Tom continued. You